If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Hello, Christian Patriots, and welcome to Church and State, where we strive to plug you into the pew and plug you into politics. I'm your host, Caleb Collier. With me, as always, Pastor Gabe Blomgren.
Which is, it's a little segue there. You almost butchered my name there, and I have the honor of introducing...
I had a frog in my throat.
I have the honor of introducing our guests because I can pronounce people's names. But you are my favorite co-host on the whole entire universe.
I'm the only co-host you've had.
Well, that is true.
That's not true, actually. You've had Pastor Ken.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, go ahead and start the introductions. This is an exciting time for Church and State. This is the first panel interview we've ever done.
We have a panel interview with the advent of Zoom technology, and I'm honored to have with us Shay. Why don't you say hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on, guys.
We have Shay Hutchison. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yes, very good. I get it butchered often, so thank you.
We also have with us Lisa Panette. Did I pronounce that right, Lisa?
You did. Great job.
Awesome. And then last but not least, we have Jan Morrow with us. How you doing, Jan?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having us.
Well, thanks for being here with us. Caleb, why don't you get us started?
All right, so we wanted to do a panel interview. There's a lot to discuss here. There's a lot that's been going on under the cover of darkness. This is so typical of government. They use a crisis, and during the crisis, while they're getting a lot of their tools implemented, think 9/11, there's also a lot going on behind the scenes. And so we wanted to discuss for sure House Resolution 6666, or I might have added too many sixes there, but regardless, it's a nasty bill. And Jan wanted to really discuss that with us. We also wanted to discuss how you can potentially get your hands on some hydroxychloroquine. And then there was a few other topics that we were also going to bring up here. But Jan, why don't you go ahead and start us off with the House Resolution bill?
Thank you so much, Caleb. I think that legislation, sometimes it's like reading an insurance contract, right? The average person doesn't pay attention, and this is where we're seriously falling short in this country. Our founders gave us this country, and I always like to start out with a quote from a gentleman who was an Irish lawyer. His name was John Philpott Curran, and he has an incredible quote that says, "The condition upon which God hath given liberty to man is eternal vigilance." And that is ringing loud and clear right now, because I think we are all guilty parties at not being plugged in to what our representatives are doing. We elect these people. We think that they're doing what we've asked them to do, but does anybody hold them accountable? So if they are your employee, if you're running a company and you have employees, you do performance evaluations, or your employees are no longer your employees if it's not a good evaluation. And we, the people, are very slothful. We've got our blinders on, and we need to take them off, and we need to understand that these people work for us. They have incredible benefits. They go in not as a millionaire, and somehow they come out of Congress or the Senate and they have millions of dollars. Where did they get that from? And the average person doesn't understand what they're really doing, because all they listen to are the glib statements that are made by many of our elected representatives, even those so-called good guys. But we need to delve deeper in that. And so I have looked at legislation for a number of years. I worked for a nonprofit. I set up advocacy chapters across the country, and I taught people very simply how to do it. And I will tell your audience simply how to do that for themselves, but they need to keep track of it. In the meantime, there's a big piece of legislation that will totally lock you up forever. And I want to say it again. This legislation will keep you locked up, and it is designed to track this so-called pandemic. I like to call it a plandemic. I will say one thing about my background. I am a former critical care unit nurse. I practiced clinically for at least 12 years. I'm very familiar with how to take disease transmission, and I have cared for many people who have been in isolation and respiratory isolation also. I'm also connected with a national organization called the Healthcare Coalition, and it is facilitated by physicians all across the country and other clinicians. We as practitioners understand that this is not a pandemic. If you look at the statistics, we are, really the flu is ahead of the death rate, and considering the CDC instructed all the hospitals to claim that people who are dying or admitted for whatever reason, I'm really telling you the truth here. I know for a fact people coming in with broken bones were getting a COVID diagnosis. People who were dying of a heart attack were getting a COVID diagnosis. And you might ask why? Because the hospital makes more money for that diagnosis. I hate to say that. There's a monetary incentive. So we don't have good statistics. In conversation with an epidemiologist in another state, I won't go into it because she likes to stay a little under the radar. She said that the CDC, there's no published data on the flu since the end of 2019.
So
and there's
everyone
a
stopped
reason
getting the
for
flu
it,
miraculously.
okay? So we have some fake statistics out there. So if we look at this from the fact that this really is not a pandemic, WHO lied, the people didn't die, Fauci's lied, Birx lied, Redfield from the CDC, Hahn is a problem. All these people are somehow perpetuating the lie. As a result of the lie, they feel that we need to have tracking. So that's why I went into that background for you. If we can bust the lie that this is not a pandemic, if Donald Trump would be so good at what he does and he calls it like it is, and I know he has this information, if he would just say, I was lied to by the WHO, China withheld information, the people in England, Ferguson lied, the IHME in the state of Washington, right, where you guys are at,
Absolutely.
lied. All these people lied. We can say no pandemic and our tracing goes away. But this is critical. Your people need to be contacting your elected representatives. I don't care who they are, whether they're a Democrat, socialist, communist, or a good guy. You need to make your voice heard, and you need to call the White House. So let me tell you a little bit about this deadly piece of legislation. It's called, okay, wait a minute, where's it at? I want to get all my details together. This is HR 6666. And Caleb, you were correct. There's 4 sixes. I will tell you that is very similar to what our Christian audience might say. Well, doesn't that seem like 666, which is the mark of the beast? And this legislation was introduced by a congressman from Illinois. His name is Bobby Rush. If your listeners might be familiar with his name, he was a Black Panther, and I'm certain that he still is. He's not a good guy. So Bobby Rush introduced this legislation on the 1st of May, and it is called the COVID-19 TRACE Act. Now, TRACE is an acronym for testing, reaching, and contacting everyone.
Wow.
This is a very dangerous piece of legislation. Currently, it has 66 co-sponsors.
There's a lot of sixes in this.
That's creepy.
Isn't that creepy? And I just verified that this morning. So a couple days ago, it was 64 co-sponsors, but 2 more people signed on. It is in the House Energy and Commerce Committee. It's in the House of Representatives. And essentially, in a nutshell, and people can read it, it's not a long bill, HHS, Health and Human Services, which is under the direction of Secretary Alex Azar, has the authority, and he will give grants to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, which, by the way, is not a government agency. It's a non-governmental agency that works with the CDC. They receive federal grants, our money, our tax dollars. So our tax dollars will be given to the CDC to identify various entities. And those entities could consist of a church group. So I tell you, this is very serious. It could consist of, a high school. It could be a social service agency, just pretty much anybody who wants to get the grant, get the money, and get the training. In 2020, they're expecting to dole out 100 billion. And I will repeat that, 100 billion. Somebody once said to me, it's million. I go, no, it's billion with a B, dollars, tax dollars, okay, that are going to trace you and everyone. Remember, testing, reaching, and contacting everyone. Currently, right now, in various states, and I'm certain that it's going on in Washington, I kind of think it's probably ubiquitous right now. I'm not quite sure where that funding is coming from, but it's probably coming from one of those bailout bills that they so readily passed. And I can tell you, because I live in the great state of Georgia, and they are doing this with fervor. Our Department of Health here at the state level is run by a person by the name of Dr. Kathleen Toomey, and she is a proud member of the Council of Foreign Relations, which I don't know if your audience is familiar with the name.
Yeah, our audience should be very familiar with the Council on Foreign Relations. Yeah.
Okay.
So
what does that tell you? That tells you that she's a representative of the UN. Truthfully, she is a former employee of the CDC. She's been actively involved with everything involved with AIDS and all of that. So she's in the medical cabal. And she is pushing, of course, contact tracing throughout Georgia. And we are actively organizing, and we have some plans in the works on that.
Yeah, it's time to remove these unelected bureaucrats for sure. And you know, this bill, this really showcases why it is so important for our audience, wherever they are, to join with the John Birch Society, because we are tackling this. We are spearheading the attack on this House Resolution Bill 6666. We are not going to allow for us to just be traced in everything that we do. And then, of course, what's coming next is, of course, the forced vaccinations. Now, I know Jan wanted to, I believe, kind of tie into this story as well as, Lisa wanted to tie into this story as well. So let's go ahead and bring Lisa on now as well.
Okay, hi. So the tentacles here are really, really long and deep. What you need to know is that the president has basically delegated his authority under these executive orders. And it takes hours and hours to pour through this. And so I can tell you, I haven't been through every single one. I have just scratched the surface on some of these. Beginning at the very start of COVID, what you had emergency delegations by the president under the Defense Production Act. He gave over to the Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, anything that had to do with food issues. So anything right now that has to do with your meat or your poultry, who has the authorization under that right now and to control that? And by the way, that means anything. So if all the employees are sick, they can take over now that production facility and ensure that our food supply is okay. So
they've nationalized it.
Yeah, well, they have, but just so you know, it's only the meat and the produce at this, or no, I'm sorry, the meat and the poultry at this point. So everything else looks like there hasn't been an authority given to anyone specifically for that sector other than the meat and the poultry. So that's the first one. The second one was the Defense Production Act. And so he gave that over also to Azar, your Health and Human Services. Also, though, the Secretary of Homeland Security, which we don't hear much about these days. That's Chad Wolf. He was also given authority under this Defense Production Act. So that includes anything like your masks. They can take over a factory and, you know, make them do the masks, etc. All the way, though, into basically any need. There is nothing that they can't say that is in need and take over a facility at this point. And now, again, this isn't our president. It's now Czar and Chad Wolf, your Homeland Security.
A very
The next
appropriate
one-
name for him.
Yes,
Chad
yeah,
Wolf.
it is.
That's great.
Okay, so the next one is under the National Emergencies Act. So he gave over to the Secretary of Defense, which is Esper, and also to the Homeland Security again, Chad Wolf. This one says that they can call forth all the military. So this means the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of Homeland Security now at this point have been given authority to call up the military. I saw every single branch listed except for the Marines. So if this is somewhere buried somewhere else, I don't know about it, but the Marines are not listed.
You know, there was a study that was done that said that the Marines were the least likely to actually turn their weapons against American citizens. I don't know if that's what happened here, but as a former Marine, I'm kind of proud to see that they're not part of this.
Nice.
Yeah. So they're the only ones not listed. Okay. So then you've got under the Public Health Services Act and the National Emergencies Act, he once again gave over to Czar. This one, he was allowed to modify the requirements of Medicare, Medicaid, your state CHIP programs, and HIPAA. And there's a lot that's been going on. So as far as the HIPAA goes, Czar definitely made modifications for HIPAA. So the HIPAA modifications were over telemed, anything to do with telemed. Basically, they said, guess what? Our Office of Civil Rights is not going to go after you if you violate HIPAA rights. I mean, that's essentially what they said.
That is huge.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
And now it's all with telemed, and it doesn't have to do with just COVID. It's any medical consultation that takes place during COVID, during that emergency. Basically, the HIPAA almost goes out the window. So this is a big, big problem. They also even give suggestions on who to use. So they talk about Facebook, using these consultations over Facebook, over Google Hangouts. I mean, it goes into depth. And again, we know that contact tracing, right? A big part of this is held where? Over the internet, right? So as they're gathering all this data and this information, and some of these consultations are taking 45 minutes, where they say you were in the presence of this person that had COVID, and they start getting into the depths of everything that they've done over their lifetimes. So now that's no longer protected under HIPAA. So then you've got the next one, the International Emergency Powers Act. He gave over to the Secretary of Interior, the Secretary of Defense, the Board of Directors of Tennessee Valley, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Director of National Intel. He gave basically, this has to do with, it's very complicated. This one was complex, but it has to do with our grid and all our electricity. And basically, as he says, sabotage. That's what it says in here, the sabotage of the grid. And so it says, he's given now the authority to these entities to say anything that we need as far as parts, service, you name it, make sure that we don't fall onto, international hands where we're in a bad situation and we're at risk. What I find particularly interesting about these executive orders is right after this one or before this one, they had one that talked about the secession of the Department of Interior Secretary. And it lists out about 10 deep who would become the new Department of Interior Secretary in case of his death.
Wow.
Yes.
It's a little ominous.
So I thought,
it really is.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So these are just scratching the surface, but what we need to know is, are we really in an emergency, as Jan said? And if we're not, we should not be using, colds, flus, whatnot, as a place to basically have an opportunity for all these other entities that have been given authority to come after our rights and basically just redefine who we are. I mean, when they talk about a reset, when you look at the entities that have been given control here, we could be looking at a great reset here. And I'm concerned. In Missouri, where I reside, we actually have a COO, and this is an unelected position that was given over. And I've been told multiple times. First of all, he was a former McKinsey partner, so I don't know if your listeners understand who McKinsey is, but McKinsey is a deep state behind the scenes. They run things. So this is who our COO is, and I would encourage your listeners to, if you have a COO, this is your first red flag.
Get rid of them.
This is your problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is your first problem.
So I needed to, I wanted to make sure that Shay had some time as well. But as we transition into the next topic here, the crisis and then the solution. This is so typical of government here. And these unelected bureaucrats, whether they be Czars or COOs of states, that alone should frighten you right there.
Yes.
So get involved. Get rid of these individuals and call them where they are. Call them out for who they are, because we have to provide solutions. We have to do something about this. All right, Shay, you are a MD, and you wanted to discuss potentially a way for citizens to get their hands on hydroxychloroquine. Is that correct?
Partially correct. I'm not an MD. I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing for speakwithanmd.com. But I do work with several hundred physicians across the country. We do have physicians in all 50 states. And Jan and Lisa did a tremendous job outlining the problem, right? And we've been very involved with several political leaders and people, experts in the space, trying to define a solution. Right. And what we're seeing is the studies are coming out. There's a lot of great information, and we've treated several hundred people across the country with hydroxychloroquine. Okay. And this can be a potential solution to the contact tracing. Right. You hear President Trump. He goes into the therapeutics and he keeps hammering on, we're seeing, vaccine's great. Do what you're going to do. However, I still believe in therapeutics. We have taken on a nationally renowned physician, Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, as a medical advisor. He's the doctor that Trump mentions when he says, I spoke to a doctor in upstate New York. He's treated several thousand people with hydroxychloroquine. So what we've done is we are a Christian-based company. Our co-founders, myself, we're all Christians. And we got tied in and started following the hydroxychloroquine developments, right? And started contacting leading physicians in the space and said, hey, how can we reach the masses with this? We think this is a solution. And we believe telemedicine is the way to do it. So what happens is you go to speakwithanmd.com and you fill out the intake information, and our doctors will consider it for prophylaxis use. Okay, so how do I get around contact tracing? I believe Jan's statements that this is a pandemic and that the numbers are inflated. However, I do believe the disease exists, and we're also concerned about it evolving into other strains, second waves, things of that nature. So if that happens, what do? I don't want to be contact traced myself. I don't want to be vaccinated myself. I am currently on hydroxychloroquine. And I'm alive. I'm here.
Yeah, you look healthy.
Yeah, thank you. No side effects, nothing like that. This isn't medical advice, but in my own experience, it's working great. My wife travels for work. She is also on it. We've treated people with active cases, confirmed active cases, that have called us in tears and said, oh my gosh, we believe that you saved our life. We believe that getting our hands on this, 8, 12 hours later, calling us crying, thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't know what I would have done. I was headed to the hospital and things of that nature. And yes, as Dr. Faustus, right? Dr. Fauci said, that's anecdotal evidence that it works. Yeah, well, anecdotally, the woman said that we saved her life, right? So, we're following the studies very closely. To Lisa's point, with the HIPAA, everything is HIPAA compliant. We remained within HIPAA. We will never share any data with a third party. We believe what we're really trying to do, we believe in the sacred doctor-patient relationship, right? And we're going to get you with a qualified doctor that understands these protocols and will speak to you about the prophylactic use of hydroxychloroquine, and no one's going to get in the way. There's no government agency is going to come in and tell that doctor whether they can or cannot treat you with the use of hydroxychloroquine. We have a mail order pharmacy that's in Florida and Alabama that will coordinate with you after the encounter takes place. So it's just a simple phone call. Doctor gives you a call and says, hey, how's it going? Walks you through the prophylactic use to see if it's necessary for you. And then we call that into a mail order pharmacy in Florida, and they will either overnight or drop the medication in the mail. And that really gets us around all of the state restrictions on the use of hydroxychloroquine as well, because Florida is a state that has no restrictions on it. And it becomes a federal issue, and we've got a pharmacy owner that believes the same way that we do is, hey, we're saving lives. I don't mind dealing with the state boards when I believe this becomes a federal issue by dropping it in the mail. So we are servicing all 50 states and can connect you with a board certified physician that'll discuss the use of HCQ with you.
This is wonderful. This is it's a free market solution. I applaud it. Give me your website once again for all of our audience.
Sure, it's Speak, S-P-A-K with an MD.com.
Speakwithanmd.com. All right, so we're winding down to the very last seconds of the show. I wanted to thank Jan, Shay, and Lisa for joining Church and State. We really appreciate it. We probably could have had a show with each of you individually, to be quite honest. So, all right, Church and State is brought to you in part by Covenant Church and Mountain View Vital Medicine. Always remember the tree of liberty is most likely a birch. And with that, Church and State is out.
God bless.
All right, we are still on this, but yeah, that goes quick, doesn't it?
Yeah,